Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to another episode of The Serene View. I'm Serene, your host, and today with me is Anthony Malmo. Anthony has the most interesting title of anyone I've ever heard of on LinkedIn. So get this, he's a well-being smuggler, a jargon cutter, a systems wrangler, a C-suite whisperer, and a dot connector. So in a while, I'll be asking Anthony to share with us a little bit about what all of those titles mean. But before that, what will you be hearing today? Well, Anthony is a systems thinker, and he will be sharing with us some of the myths around burnout. Why burnout, as we know of it, is never an individual issue, is never a psychological issue, and is much bigger than that. And beyond that, what can you as a leader do for your organization or for your team um, to prevent burnout on a more systemic level? And if you are HR, what can you do for your organization to prevent burnout on an organizational wide level? So please join me in welcoming Anthony. Anthony,
Hi,
please.
Serene, and hello to everyone viewing us. So let me guess, you wanted me to explain all those odd titles that I gave myself, right? Um,
Yes.
so so basically, it works out to this. I did have the generic kind of director of change and capability, or, my role, but I think like a lot of people, your actual role that you put up there doesn't really cover off on everything that you do and all the rest. And I was actually thinking about, like, if we get past all the titles and whatever, what do I actually do? And I really felt like well-being smuggling is a great deal of what I do. A lot of what we do at Alos is trying to change the mindsets of organizations to think about things, to think about mental health and the well-being of their employees in a more from a less reactive and crisis-driven approach, and trying to think about things from a more preventative approach, a more proactive approach. And what that means is that you often got to get the message across to people. So, I mean, jargon cutting is a big part of it, speaking in plain language to people, taking what can be kind of complex topics and trying to make them digestible to the average person. And attention, poor attention, and overworked leaders, and really smuggle well-being into the organisation, as opposed to just telling people that, oh well, it's just basically trying to just sell, let's be honest, like individual level crisis-driven support. So, smuggling it through the door. A lot of I guess, let's be honest, CFOs and people watching their purse just going, why would I do this for my business? Why is this my responsibility? And so for me, it's about convincing them that it's actually in the interest of their business. And really what we're doing is, the bigger game here is about improving the business by putting worker health and well-being right at the center of things. So that's kind of the story.
Great. Thank you very much. So for those of you who are here with us, if you have any questions for Anthony, especially around the myths around burnout, do share with us. Anthony is here to bust all the myths that you've ever heard around burnout. So if you think about burnout, right, what do you think? Do you think of, oh, not enough resilience? Okay, the person definitely has a mental issue. Maybe it is a mental health problem, and they should go and take a rest, recover, build up their resilience, and do more about it. Well, do you agree, Anthony?
Well, in terms of, like, what is it? I mean, yes, it is psychological, and yes, it definitely does lead to significant mental health issues. But I think we kind of sell ourselves short in terms of ignoring or only restricting our definition to the idea that it's about having mental exhaustion. Because the facts are there that what we see is that it's this also if you have this prolonged exposure to what they call glucocorticoids or stress hormones, these end up throwing your endocrine system out of whack, which in turn, throws out all your hormonal balances. So that is affecting everything from sleep through to how you're processing foods, immune system, mood, all the rest. And when it goes on for a long time, it can knock out, for lack of a better word, it rusts your organs. And I've got firsthand experience of that too, because I went through a period of pretty significant stress many years back. And the sum total of that, although we can't be 100% sure, but timing was the timing was spot on. What I ended up developing was type 1 diabetes as an adult. Now, normally that's just something you get as a kid. And it's genetic and built in, but I got what they call LADA much later in life. And when they look at it, it's basically it's an autoimmune disorder. The body is on fight or flight mode constantly. So there's that impact, and then there's even further research showing that it boils down to it can even start impacting your DNA. And this hasn't been confirmed yet, but I think this also raises the possibility that we might be seeing longer-term epigenetic effects, as in children being born right now throughout this period may in fact have issues going down when they're growing up, which could have been essentially encoded and then potentially triggered when they're growing up. And affecting them. And we've seen that before, by the way. Like there's precedents for this in people who've gone through wars and famines and things like this. So on the one hand, that's to show that there's rock solid evidence that this is not simply a factor of being mentally tired or being in a bad mood or anything like that. It is all those things, but it's so much more, and it has a solid physiological basis as well. The other thing there is that, and this is a common misconception across all of mental health, is that this is it all comes down to your mental health, what's going on inside your head, and therefore, if there's anything wrong with you, well, then the problem is you. And what we know is that this is much more about what we call social determinants of health. Has been around for a long time, but there's a famous quote. There's a famous quote in "Dying for a Paycheck." Jeffrey Pfeffer wrote that book, but quote saying, the person that you work for has the person that you report to at work has a greater influence on your health than your doctor, which is a hell of a thing to kind of to think about. And so there's that level, but then on top of that, we've also got now, on the back of COVID, on the back of worsening financial situations globally, an acceleration in an already difficult, already worsening numbers or trend in burnout globally. And so what we're looking at here is this is global. It keeps getting worse. And I know that just from internal communications with one of our with a psychologist I was speaking with recently, our National Psychological Association has, they've reportedly seen that in the last 3 months, we've seen another dramatic drop in mental health and wellbeing across the nation as well. So, this is a big issue that is connected at a sociological level, even arguably at an ecological level, sociological, down into organizations, down into teams, and then down into the individual. And so once we start to look at it like that, I think there's a lot more opportunities and leverage for change, beneficial change that can make an impact that can, I think, help businesses, but also whole economies at this point, whole nations going forwards.
So let's look a little bit about it. I mean, what are some of the things that are, systematic measures for burnout prevention?
So basically, probably something that's relevant here is there's been a growing trend globally, and Australia is actually at the forefront right now of looking at instead of focusing on individual level approaches to well-being, so the typical resilience coaching or providing people with better food in the office and all of these things, which, by the way, all good. But they often ignore what's going on at a systemic level. And what I mean by that is at a team level and at a leadership level and an organizational level. And so what we're looking at, what's been said, I guess how do I say this? The light bulb moment and happened, it's been going on for quite a while, but I think it was the big signal was when the ISO 45003 came out, which was essentially to say, what if we took a standards approach and even implemented like a work health safety approach, where you're implementing a hierarchy of controls, right? So instead of saying, okay, well, instead of just telling people to toughen up and cope better, and not changing anything above or doing very little, so actually, step number one, can we just eliminate this at its source? Like if we can find out what are the key drivers of stress and distress and people's general malaise at work, can we identify those things inside the organization and eliminate them? Now, those are things like toxic behaviors, and so bullying and bullying and harassment and these kind of toxic leadership and all these kind of things. The second part there is to say, well, also, and this is a big one that I think is huge, is going through what I'd call policy debt or procedural debt. And so what I'm meaning is that in the tech development arena, they have what they call tech debt, which is where you're writing code and you need to fix something in a hurry, so you just type in a little patch code, what have you, and you do patch after patch after patch after patch after patch. Over time, all of those little patches you have to work around make it all untenable and vulnerable and less resilient as a software system. Now, the same thing can be said at a organizational level with all those little policies, procedures, documents that people have to fill out, reporting, who reports to who needs to know about these things, who do you CC on an email, all of these things. These suck the life out of people. Like if you talk with people a lot, that's one of the things that they just drives them mad. In addition to things like things inside, look, if you look inside of teaching and medicine right now, so much burnout going on. And when you dig into it, it's the amount of note taking and reporting that people have to do. So I think this is a really interesting conversation to have with people, because ultimately what you're doing is basically taking something akin to like an agile approach, or you're looking at how do you actually run your organization more effectively, more efficiently. And this is not about adding more at this stage. It's actually going in and saying, well, how do we remove these things from our system? And in that way, we remove the load from people. We remove the distractions and the task switching, which is mentally draining on people. And the research on that is loud and clear. So just by the way, that's the top of the funnel elimination. But then you go through sort of, what can we substitute?
I was going to jump in. But I was going to jump in and agree with you, because one of my previous speakers said this, that in Holland, they made a study of all of the useless work that is going on. I mean, stuff like what you say, right, that doesn't add value to the organization and to the bottom line. And they calculated that it was in the trillions, just in Holland alone, by the way, in 1 year. And it was, so the study is published in Dutch. I can dig it up and share with you guys. But can you imagine what is being done around the world, right? In terms of all these kind of like useless stuff, right? Reporting on things, oversight, getting approvals on approvals, making sure that there's 3 signatures and so on. Anything that doesn't directly contribute to the value of the organization. So that's just something to add to that. And I think most organizations have it. And like you said, it's the one thing that people hate the most. And a lot of it is, something happened and therefore let's like make this one little policy or procedure to patch it. Something else happens 2 months
Yeah.
later, we make another little policy to patch it. And over the course of a company's lifetime, say 30 years, 100 years, that is hundreds, if not thousands of policies.
Oh, look, and basically, I mean, I haven't even finished with the hierarchy yet, but I mean,
Yes,
that's a huge issue because, I think we tend to get addicted to more, right? More, and it feels like you're accomplishing something. But if we're going through a productivity, if we're going through at a global scale this huge event, we keep on pushing our pedal to the metal and going harder and harder and harder and faster because that's what we've done before. I wonder if now, if you can consider this a bit of a winter, right? This is a winter for business. Well, what do you do at this time of year? Well, you go back and you start pruning things, don't you? It's downtime, it's slow time. So how about we just go through policies, procedures, go through your organization, start talking with people. I've even heard of people doing similar to, like, you have a bug bounty. In tech, you have a bug bounty where you pay people to go and find all the silly errors and what have you. I've heard of other people saying, dumb rule elimination bounty. And some people have dedicated roles where they're just walking around organizations, finding out all of these things that people are doing and then figuring out, geez, that's a dumb thing. Let's remove that. And I would argue that that's faster, easier, and more effective than a lot of these additional policies, which add to the complexity, add to the workload of people, add to the mental burden. And by the way, people are not firing on all cylinders right now, and they won't be for a long time. And I think that's part of the other illusion. One of those myths that we need to get rid of is that, we'll be back soon. We'll be back soon. My argument is that probably we need to start thinking, organizations might even need to start thinking about what I call building an off-ramp. And what I mean by this is that you can see globally the burnout rates. You don't have to look far. The reports are everywhere. If you can, but the coping mechanisms that people have developed are things like, the quiet quitting was a big one, right? But then what came next was bare minimum Mondays. So that's happening. And so, okay, fine. And people are working from home and they're trying to get flexible work. Everyone's trying to do this, but they're all doing it on their own. That makes it very difficult from a logistical perspective, from an organization, to move as one, to get it all done, and just manage all of those individual kind of changes. And so I've been toying with the idea of, how unrealistic is it for organizations to then say, look, it's kind of tough times right now for a lot of organizations. And so what if we were able to make a coordinated organizational level reduction in let's say growth, but essentially reduction in workloads and work demands, in the aim that, like a marathon runner, you can't just keep pushing. You've got to manage your energy. And my concern is that if organizations just keep trying to go back to the well and squeeze more blood from the stone, what we're going to do is individuals, teams, people are going to hit walls, and that's going to risk the viability of the organizations. And we've seen it also here in Australia around the viability of entire sectors. So, education and some in the health, but aged care is another one, where people are just pushed beyond their limits. And when that happens at scale, which is what's happening, it's a threat to, in a lot of cases, the things that hold society together. So at that point, it becomes a national issue. So, not to catastrophize too much, but that is, if you're looking at the numbers, that's what we're seeing. So now back to your original point, Serene, because you did ask around what can organizations do. Now, elimination's the first one. Substitution's another one. Basically, you could say substituting positive and toxic behaviors and maybe moving people around offices or change who they're interacting with. The other part there is redesign. Now, again, there's one of the most robust, well accepted, and generally usable models is the job demands resource model. Sorry, just had my screen go black, so I wasn't touching
Yes.
it.
No,
So
no.
the
Sorry.
job design resources model. Now that's typically, there is this basic principle that says, hey, if you've got if your demands are high, you need the necessary resources to get that done. And in addition, and so if you don't, and so a lot of people are under huge demands, and the question is, do they have the resources? Now, the resources aren't just the tools; they're also around the people that are the level of support that you're getting, the know-how on all of these things. But there's a more interesting model, and this is the evolution of the JD, what they call the job design resources model, which is multi-level. Now, I like multi-level because it employs that same basic principle, so it's easy enough for people to get their head around. But essentially what you're saying is, okay, let's take that same kind of principle and how do we extend it, not just at an individual, but then how do we take that to a team level? How do we take that to leadership, and then finally at an organizational level? And what we see is that these kind of systemic approaches are the only approach that we know of that have the promise of reducing burnout. Because I should also say, the evidence out there on individual approaches to burnout prevention, go and find me some good research that shows that any of it works. It's really hard to come by. I saw a
I was going to
analysis.
say that.
Yeah.
I was going to say 2 days ago, I posted this report by Mercer, just like in April of this year, which basically said that they did this. It's not by Mercer; it's by another organization. But basically, they did this review of all the individual, and in one sentence, it says that there is no systemic evidence that individual prevention of burnout work.
Yeah.
So that's one of the sentences in the conclusion, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we start looking at that multi-level approach, and then we start saying, okay, what could be done from again that job design approach, but then also what could be done? How's the climate in our organization? And then let's look at things like HR practices. Once we start looking at that, we get some better leverage points on what could be done. Instead of just doing patch-up jobs on individuals, you're actually saying, okay, can we redesign and modify how we run the organization that works in line with how humans operate? And I think this is probably one of the most important points. It's like a lot of our approaches to business have really been, the hangovers of Taylorism from the 1920s and working in factories, and the idea being, if we measure everything and we quantify everything, and then we'll optimize maximum efficiency and extract maximum value from each human. And the issue there is that humans aren't robots, right? You can do that with the machine. You can kind of dial it in, set it up, dial it in, and walk away from it, and it'll work for a long time on a pretty consistent basis. But humans aren't like that. And now more and more humans do knowledge work, and now more and more humans are working in groups on very complex things. And so suddenly you're in a state of interconnected flux and flow that you just can't use such set it and forget it mechanical thinking to how we manage these things. So basically what we're saying is we do know generally what people need to flourish and thrive at work. And I should also say, this is the other thing that I think gets missing in all of this. Good work is good for us. We've seen that as well. Like, good work is good for us. It boosts our mood. It has protective health factors, and of course, the flow-on effects from that are good business. Conversely, if we're working against nature at the end of the day, and by that I mean human nature as well, then ultimately that's going to break down at some point. And look, to take a cynical angle, okay, if you have an unending number of or an unending or limitless talent pool that you could just replace all these people, the burn and churn model, Okay, fine, but well, maybe not fine. It's highly unethical. But if you're the most cynical, numbers-driven person, and you just wanted to chew through humans, and you had that, all right, maybe that might make sense. But if you're in any other industry, and so many other businesses are, your talent matters, especially in knowledge work. And so you've got to ask the question that, how much is talent loss and employee churn, and then training up the new people and building the IP, and then all the impacts that has on interpersonal communication and team productivity and across the board, plus reputation, right, and your legal fees and your comp payments. You have to ask the question that, is this doing more harm than good?
And actually, I mean, if you want to think about it, we are now in a state where people are driving machines. It is not like you said, right, in a mechanistic state where production lines will drive and it doesn't really matter who is there as long as you have a pair of hands. Now it's more, what you have up there, who are these people, the knowledge that is in individuals matter. So when someone is lost, there's a lot of institutional knowledge that goes with this person. And it's not necessarily that even if we hire somebody brighter and younger and brighter and better, that we can replace that. And like you said, if people are burnt out, I mean, let's just put it this way, right? If we are collectively as an organization burnt out, tired, and not performing at our best, that is an immediate 20% of what your organization could be. Like just like that, if everybody's tired and everybody's overworked, right, that is like immediately taken off. And I'm surprised at how many organizations at this moment, in fact, from my coaches, this is what I'm hearing, right, that organizations are loading them. So they've had a hiring freeze for 2-3 years. Now business has picked up, but they refuse to hire any more people because who knows if you're going to go into a recession, right? And so people are getting loaded up work to the extent that it's becoming untenable. It goes into the midnights, it eats into their evenings, and they can, as in the words of one of my coaches, I can no longer maintain a normal life. And when
burnout
that
is
happens,
contagious.
Exactly. You get one person down, and then what happens next? Exactly like what you said, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know why organizations are thinking in that way, because let's put it this way, right? If this person is stressed out, overloaded, and not getting sufficient rest and sleep, what are the chances of mistakes? What are the chances that they will be innovative and creative? What are the chances that they'll be able to think strategically? And that's the bulk of our work right now. Anyway.
Well, you asked that question, why are businesses doing this? Well, I think it's like at the end of the day, businesses are a collection of humans getting stuff done, with some technology and some machines in between. And when we are faced with uncertainty, and when we are faced with a lack of clarity and a sense of control has been taken away from us, the panic sets in. We do tend to behave with. We tend to focus in on the here and the now and the urgent, and it takes significant, what I would call, real strategic leadership. And I think it's far rarer than we give credit to, and I wouldn't even put myself in that category. But throughout history, and from here, there are these rare people who are able to actually sit in that fire and not succumb to the short-term panic and fear, and pull themselves out of that and think about the bigger picture and plan strategically and plan long-term. And I guess potentially this is a bit of a great filter moment for a lot of organizations in that way, because I too have seen what you're talking about, where organizations are, they're not hiring, but there's more work coming in, and so they're just piling on more and more work to the staff that are already there. And it's an interesting one, because if we look at what happened prior, what we saw during the Great Resignation, you had people leaving organizations, which and often you had the more experienced people. They were like, you know what, I'm out. I didn't. I've done this for too long, and I can't deal with all this. So they left. What that meant is that you ended up with the same amount of work being done by fewer people and also newer people. I mean, what the consequences of that on quality control, productivity as a whole. And then, of course, people kept up their end of the bargain. They really tried to work. They carried their load. I've lots of stories about people doing multiple roles and covering for other people. But ultimately, they succumb to it too. And that's where that domino effect of burnout starts perpetuating throughout organizations, all the way through to, as I've mentioned previously, at the point of potentially risking not just companies, but entire sectors that are essential to how a country or an organization operates.
And one of the things I was going to say is this, right? Which is a lot of the times when somebody resigns, the organization, at least the policies and the way that is being put out these days work like this. I resign, right? And then you can only get the approval to hire a replacement for me after I leave. And then it will take you, 2 months, maybe 3 months in this talent crunch to find a suitable candidate. So between when I leave and when you coming in to replace me is up to speed, could be as long as half a year. And who's taking up the slack in that half a year, right? Is everybody else, or is the leader? Which leads to this, like you said, domino of burnout, right? Even if the organization, yes, I will, yes, they leave, we'll replace it, but they're not replacing. So in the past, when I was working in corporate, when someone tenders, this is the reason why we have a month or 2 months, so that we immediately look for somebody and we try to get somebody in before this person actually leaves. And a lot of the times we do succeed, but now just getting someone suitable could be as long as 3 or 6 months. Even if they start the moment that they have tendered, it's still a 2-month gap between one person going out and the next person coming in. And so that's exactly what you said. Yeah.
Well, it kind of takes us back to that original point, that idea around, I mean, how nice it would be to be able to hold on to your talent, right? And if you know that this is, you've attempted to do this kind of hiring people leave and hire more people and try and get them in, but if this is proving unsustainable and you've tried this previously, then I think going back to that idea of looking at what you can eliminate within an organization, policies, procedures, inefficiencies, burden, workloads even. And it might even come down to dropping jobs, like dropping contracts and things like that, which all sounds, especially that last bit, saying no to business sounds, might sound heretical to how our financial models. But again, going back to that idea of the marathon runner, to look at, okay, this is a bit of a marathon, everybody. We're not bouncing back. There is no credible or compelling information that I've seen anywhere to suggest this is going to be over or this is going to suddenly turn around anytime soon. So if this is the case, and if this is winter, then what is it that, it's time for us all, individuals, but also at teams and organizational levels, to sit there and say, well, what can we do to get through this winter? And how do we manage our energy and manage your resources, which is, including the humans within your organization and their energy? How can you take your foot off the pedal, so to speak, and provide people basically an off-ramp that allows you as an organization to get through, allow people to recover. And this is going to take time because, well, what's the alternative? I'm not saying it's a nice thing to do. I'm saying it's a very hard decision, but what's the alternative?
So let's say if I'm a leader and
Mm,
I have organizational responsibility, then some
mm,
of these that you have mentioned, which is like, reducing workload, even cutting back on jobs, looking
mm,
at, procedures, in a way, kind of strategize your operations and get rid of all of the, dumb things that people are doing as patchwork may work.
mm,
But what if I'm not, right? I'm not a top leader. I'm not the guy
mm.
who says it, right?
Yeah.
I'm just middle management.
Yeah, so that multi-level job design is handy in that regard because it also points to this idea that at a team level, you can do team level job design, right? And also two ideas here. One is job design, which is more of a top-down kind of approach. And then there's job crafting, which is more of an individual approach where the individual themselves crafts how they do their work. I think both are necessary. They become a symbiotic approach that helps. But essentially, if you had a little team, would it be such a bad idea to spend a couple of afternoons a week for the next month or so, looking at how you might be able to uh, think about how people work together and how can you redesign how you work. And it requires a bit of truth telling for people to actually say, I actually am struggling, I actually am overworked, and giving that permission for people. Um, and then design slash crafting how you work as a team so that, hey, you might be running at 70% or you might be running at 60% for the foreseeable couple of months. Um, but at least you'll make it through, because anybody who continues, if and I am making the assumption that there is significant burnout and what have you going on in your team. People try to hide it, but you'll see it in the quality of their work and their reliability and their ability to remember stuff and make executive decisions and and focus and all of these kind of things. Um, but those teams slash organizations and even and individuals who just keep pushing, trying to sprint to the finish line, which we don't know where the finish line is. They're the ones that are going to break, and arguably irreparably, in terms of a team functioning or organizational functioning approach. So yeah, it goes back to that idea. How can you, given the resources that you have, as in the energy levels that you have, how can you work towards work at a sustainable level for the foreseeable future? And one thing in there is I think increasing control. We've seen that it's a famous model that comes out of OrgPsych on demand control support. And what we find is that when your job demands are really high, you also need a lot of control over it. And if you've got those two things, generally speaking, you can get through it. And this is why small business owners and all of this, it's often the most stressful thing you'll ever do in your life. But the sense that you're the boss of your own, you're in command of your own future and you're making decisions. That's great. We humans are really sensitive to hierarchy. We're also really sensitive to this sense of autonomy and self-determination. If your demands are high, but you don't have a lot of control over the work that you do, that really tends to chew people up inside. Now, the alternative there is for organizations, because there's the third lever, is lots of support, right? You've got to just provide heaps of support to buffer against that. These kind of jobs, they are in those kind of, let's be honest, kind of exploitative jobs. You could argue at its most extreme, it's slavery, but it doesn't need to be. There are lots of jobs like that where you have very little control. One of those areas in which you'll see that are highly regulated industries. So medicine and law, and you can name it. Aged care is another one. Anywhere and education as well. Know that, been there, burnt out. When you are stuck between, you just have to follow these procedures and rules, and you have to take reports on everything. That ends up that sense of not even, it's patronizing, basically. That sense that you're not in control and you're working basically to make someone else rich, and you have no say over your life, it really eats us up inside. And so in those kind of organizations, you really, if there are lots of policies in place and regulations that you have to follow, then following that model, the only other thing that you've got at your disposal is to increase the level of support to your people. And as I said, that's a tough spot to be in, to be perfectly honest, because ultimately you'd love to be able to do this elimination, substitution, redesign work at the top. And by the way, I think there always is. I think there always is. And if you follow that kind of logic to say, let's start with what we can get rid of, what can we substitute it with, how do we redesign things? If you can just exhaust all possible answers there first, and then finally, if nothing else works, well then, yeah, okay, try and build out the coping strategies within people. But it's just a good rule of thumb to follow.
I think I was gonna just ask you, which is if because my background is in HR, and then a lot of these things unfortunately end up in HR's mandate. Oh, our people are burning out. HR, what do we do? Right. So if there's any HR sitting in, there aren't many HR with the capability of reducing policies, procedures, or even on managing workload. What can HR do to better
Yeah, it's a
manage?
really interesting question. Well, I'll give you an idea of what's going on in Australia. So in 2019, they did a productivity commission. The productivity commission did an investigation into the impact and the cost of mental health on Australia. What they found is it's about 10% of our GDP is lost. And then they looked even deeper and said, well, where are the biggest places where we can capture these losses? It was in the workplace. Strangely enough, about a year later, our governments at a state level anyway have started implementing far more rigorous approaches for essentially mandating using through codes of conduct. And here in Victoria, they're pushing for legislation, which is another level higher, to actually mandate to organisations that you need to proactively manage these risks under basically a work health and safety protocol. So what you do for a physical safety, you're taking that same kind of approach and the same kind of legal punishments and instruments behind it for penalties, including things like manslaughter here in Victoria, and then applying that to a psychosocial management. And so to answer your question, that raises more challenges here, because what this is now doing is it is to a degree shifting this away from HR and putting it under health and safety, which to a degree makes sense. Like, I agree with it. I think it is still a step forwards. I still think HR has to be at the table on this. And the reason is because while I do think this is a tremendous step forwards, there are unintended consequences of this. A couple of them is that, again, physical safety has a long and deep history in physical, so engineering language, right? Factories and physical injury. So you get a lot of this engineering language, and models and I guess modes of thinking, or like mental models that people bring to it. My concern with that, and I think it's generally overlooked, is that psychosocial it's not like a machine, right? We've mentioned this before. This is not linear. Risk matrices, I don't think, are effective here. And in terms of managing them, it's just not as simple as removing the thing from the place. Everybody, our mental health it's very rarely has a monocausal, it's multi-causal, everything's flowing together, everything's connected, people are changing up and down. And then it brings in the other thing, which is, again, this all falls on WHS, right? Work health and safety. And again, this is the problem when we frame these things as, it's a health and safety issue, or it's a HR issue. Ultimately, if we step back from all of this and get past the compliant, here in Australia, there's a lot of obsession now about how do I get compliant? How do I get compliant? I'm like, you're selling yourself short right there. what is the ultimate goal here? We are trying to maintain a level of workforce sustainability, which in turn means business productivity / survival, and hopefully some profits in a very demanding environment. And I think if we can have that kind of conversation and say, what does it take to run a business that can operate under these conditions when you have global levels of burnout and deteriorating mental health? The numbers keep getting worse no matter what we throw at it, it seems. What kind of organization is going to survive and potentially thrive in these kind of environments? And so if you look at it from that lens, then you know what? A lot of your people in the agile area, your people in COOs are in charge on top of this. This becomes a CEO level issue, and it really becomes what are the essential ingredients for our organization to survive, and how do we work with what we've got the best way in the best way possible to get to where we want to get to. And so I shudder at the thought that we continue to handball mental health to any particular group within an organization, be it HR, work health safety, because this is actually, it's how we live, it's how we work. So that's where we need to look at it from.
I think you're right, because a lot of these, there's a lot of talk around sustainability nowadays, and a lot of talk about what is a sustainable business. And we are looking at how can we not over-consume natural resources, while at the same time we are over-consuming human resources. I know we are moving on from speaking of that human resources, human capability or whatever it is, but the fact of the matter is, regardless of what we call them, we are burning them up. We are burning them out. And that's the same like looking at the natural resources that we are basically, like what you said, churning, use and throw. I think we just need to step out of the entire mental model, or that we can just use.
And, well, Serene, you're thinking really systemically, and you're weighing into some very, very, very contentious areas. Look, without derailing this entire conversation, this is where this kind of thinking and these kind of models, they do start pushing at these much larger questions. Mariana Mazzucato, pretty famous author in economics, she has this lovely phrase around, destroyers of extractors of wealth masquerading as creators of wealth. And what she's talking about is that, when we do our financial, when we factor in economics, where a lot of those externalities, as they're called, damage to environment, damage to people, damage to society, aren't really factored in. And the consequence is that what looks like something that's actually profitable and doing something good, actually, if you factor in all of the impact, it's actually a net loss on society. And so this is another curly question around, extractive financial or economic models that we use. And even this comes down to the metrics of, have a look at what's happened with when people are trying to even measure productivity. A lot of it is like they're trying to count how much time, how many people have come to work and how long they're sitting on a seat. That needs, like, if I can watch them, then I'll know they're working. And this is a real challenge in knowledge work. And I don't know if anyone's really ever come up with good solutions to it either. And until those solutions do come through, if you're a manager and you have to run around checking who's on seats to make sure they're wiggling their mouse and typing things in, that's not a situation any of us want to be in. And also, it doesn't really tell you much about productivity, or even the intangibles that lead to these things. So I've often asked on LinkedIn and stuff like, what are the things that really add value to your business, but you can't or you don't measure. And then it comes through. Well, it's trust. It's, feeling like I belong. It's about feeling like I matter around here. Now, okay, I'm sure, I know there's plenty of org psychs out there going, but we have an evaluation tool for that. Yeah, okay, you do. I would question how many organizations actually do that, and then how many actually pay attention to those numbers anyway. This ties in with a really interesting report that was done by McKinsey not long ago. People can Google it. Basically, Google something like why employees are quitting, and then basically what they have is an X and a Y axis. On the X axis, it's why the employees say they quit, and why the bosses think they thought they quit. And if you have a look, there's this really interesting. Let's have a look. You have a look at why people are quitting. Why the bosses think they're quitting. They think they're quitting because they found better pay somewhere else, or they wanted more. The work was too hard, or they want more flexibility. Things like this. But really, what you saw there is that the bosses generally saw the reasons their employees were leaving were for these rational, economic, work-related reasons. Then you flip over and you have a look at the y-axis, and you say, okay, why actually are they leaving? And people are like, I don't feel appreciated around here. I don't think my opinions matter. I don't actually feel like I belong here. All these emotional things. Right, so it's really interesting. You can kind of draw a full circle around most of the bosses think it's logical, rational decision making, and then actually people are leaving for far more intangible, emotional things, which are much harder to get a grasp on in terms of metrics. And I think that comes down possibly to an issue of what we often refer to as metrics fixation. We tend to measure the things that are easy to measure, and we ignore the things that are hard to measure. But that doesn't mean that the things that are hard to measure don't matter. Actually, in a lot of cases, they matter more than anything, because you know what? It's what makes us human. And I think, I guess maybe as a sort of final thought here, it's this idea
I was going to say that Stephanie has a very good point. You say so productivity measures are terrible because people are not machines, and it's not the way to treat people.
Yeah.
And I actually have, I was going to say that I kind of looked at a lot of these productivity measures. And the biggest issue is this, right? Which is, how do you measure the value that someone brings? Obviously, there is the dollars and cents value. But as you say, right, how do you measure the value somebody bring for team cohesion, for better collaboration, for keeping the pantry stocked, for, telling the truth, for example? All these intangible things. And the best part about measuring trust, so yes, I've seen some of these measurements for trust, is that they work very well when the employees generally trust the organization. But if the employees do not trust the organization, no one will tell you the truth anyway. So all of these surveys and measures fall through the floor, because who's going to tell you?
I call it death by dashboard. More than a few organizations have fallen prey to that. Look, at the end of the day, we all know this stuff matters. And you know why it matters? Because when it doesn't happen to you, when you're not getting that sense of value, you're not feeling respected, you're not feeling like the effort and the reward matters, you don't really know what's coming around the corner and whether you've got a lot of occupational uncertainty. We know how that feels. We've probably all had that experience in our lives. Now, so we know it matters. Okay, so we can't, it's difficult to measure. But I think the thing that we need to keep in mind here is that this stuff, intuitively, we all know matters. And so we have to work extra hard, especially right now when there is significant uncertainty and pressure, and we're all coming off the back of many years of just pretty exhausting and borderline terrifying circumstances. And people are not running on all their cylinders. So we need to figure out what are the things that keep people together right now. And you know what? That's what great leaders have done. Reed Shackleton, right? The Antarctic explorer. There's more than enough stories throughout history of what great leadership looks like. Not only just greatly, this whole idea of this savior on top of the hill is going to help us all. I also extend that to all of us in terms of it's this connection with others as well. History is replete with examples of large groups of people, communities of people who have suffered immensely. But the interesting thing is we humans are very good at suffering and enduring, and we're very resilient when we suffer together. I'm half Irish, Jesus, there's some deep misery and oppression that goes back there, and death and what have you. Yes. And then what do you see from that? Well, you see a strong sense of strong comedy scene, and all of that. Now, so what I'm saying is yes, we can endure a great deal. Humans are social creatures, and we can endure a great deal as groups. Where we fall apart is when we try and do things all on our own. And when you have that sense that you're suffering and you're suffering on your own, that is when people fall apart. And I think therein lies, to bring it full circle on, burnout, as the problem of looking at burnout as an individual issue or any mental health issues like this. So long as we keep emphasizing the individual, we keep reinforcing the idea that it's actually you're broken, and that in actual fact, what we need to start looking at is group level resilience is the way that we're going to get through this, because you know what, that's always got us through everything since year dot. And so the question then becomes for organizations, how are you going to do that? Working with not only the systems that you have, but also the people that you have, right? The group, the community that you have. How's your community going to get through this?
So, we are coming to the top of the hour. Just a brief recap of what we have spoken for those of you who came on a bit late. We spoke about some of the systemic measures for burnout prevention. And I think one of the biggest thing that we have talked about really is that as a group, we need to take a look, like a real hard look at what it is that we are doing, because there is a lot of, stuff that we can do on an organization, on a leadership, or even on a team level. You talked about policy or procedural debt, meaning all those stuff that was put in because there was just this one incident that happened this one time, and therefore we make another little rule to patch it up. And an accumulation of all of those end up, crushing and weighing people down. So how can we run our organizations more efficiently? How can we look at what we can get rid of to make all of these unnecessary work do well? And what is a realistic workload, right? How can we cut down to a realistic workload? You spoke a little bit about multi-level job design and resource. So rather than thinking of it as one job, one resource, but to look at it as communally, what are the jobs that we need and what are the resources that we need? And therefore, we need to sit down and talk to each other rather than sort of like going it alone. But we need to do, because if we continue to work at the pace that we are working, we are going to break down. And right now, what's happening is many companies are faced with increased uncertainty. Therefore, there's more panic, and people are focusing on the here and now, which is leading them to, overload their people. So if you are a leader and you are at the top of the leadership, we need strategic leadership. We need people who can just sit here and actually think of what really needs to be done. And even if we are not at the top, even if we are not, the guy who can make all the policies and procedures go away, how we can design or craft our work, right? Which we are talking about job design, job crafting, and this demand control support axis, which is the more that the work demands of you, the more control you need over it. And if you cannot get control over it for whatever reason, maybe it's highly regulated or for other reasons, then you need a lot of support, right? So in highly regulated industries, the only thing you can do is increase the level of support. And if you are in HR, then we think you should really try and make this a priority for your CEOs, because at the end of the day, it really isn't about HR, it isn't about no WSH or any of it, but really it's about how are we working and how can we work better, right? So what are the ways in which we can actually get to where we want as an organization in a sustainable manner? We talked a little bit about it, and I think if Stephanie is still with us, I was going to tell you that she agreed with me about how we are burning out, right? I mean, we are extracting wealth, we're not creating wealth, and we're extracting it out of natural resources, we're extracting out of people resources. And we just have got to stop working in this way. So, is there any final word of wisdom that you want to share with us? Like, if there's one thing that you want us to remember, what is it?
I'm guessing people like, oh, okay, a lot of information. Where should I go? What can I do? Probably a good place to start. You can see for free online the ISO 45003. That's a good start. There's stuff like this. That's a good book. I haven't seen any digital copies yet for people to grab, but there's more and more of this coming out. It kind of goes across the globe and helps people understand where all the different countries are at and some of the places to implement. There's a lot on job demand resources model, but I also think that I think multi-level's where it's at. There is an annual review that I stumbled across recently in my research. 10 years on, it's a lovely summary. It's open access. Which is gives a great rundown of everything that's involved. I'm meant to be putting out a blog on this sometime soon, but things are getting in the way. So yeah, get curious about it. Here in Australia, if you want to see how Australia is pioneering this, check out Safe Work Australia and their work on psychosocial hazard management. I think it's a real mindset shift for a lot of people to kind of say, oh, wow, we're going to manage this like physical risks and controls. So follow me on LinkedIn, post about this stuff all the time. And lots of other distracting ideas and curious thoughts.
So if you want to connect with Anthony, this is his LinkedIn. And if you want to talk a little bit more to him about how your organization can help in a more systemic way to prevent burnout, this is his company, and you can speak to him and figure out what is it that you can do as an organization. Like what we've discussed, right? This is not really not about just prevention, HR issue or WSH issue. This is really about how can we work in a way that is sustainable, so that our company can continue being around, can continue thriving in this new knowledge economy. So thank you very much, Anthony. I really appreciate your time, all your words of wisdom. Well, actually, I think this is the last of our series. So I was good. Usually I would have said, okay, the next person. And then I caught myself there. So I don't actually, yes, you're the last person, right? So it started from individual, and then we went on to, and within a company, and then we went on to community, and now we're looking at systems, right? Basically, the entire sector, the entire system, and how it can go. So thank you very much for joining me, for all of you. And if you have any questions of me, yes, drop us an email or drop us a text on LinkedIn. So thank you very much and have a good evening. Well, good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, wherever you are.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Serene. Great chat.
Nice. Thanks. Bye.